Welcome, Jill.
Hello, good morning,
Hi.
Good afternoon. I hope you can...
It's evening for us, it's morning for you. Welcome, we're really happy to see you here, and I've already introduced you while they were trying to get you online, so I'll hand over to you now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be making the presentation. I'm very sorry that I can't be there. I'm going to talk about transforming the knowledge system to support what we're all talking about in the conference, research, integration and implementation. And of course, in some respects, you could add an S to the word system. There are lots of knowledge systems. What I'm trying to talk about here is the overall knowledge system and the underlying subsystems. The underlying issues that we're dealing with, and I'm sure you've talked about them a lot during the day, are the accelerating global change, the planetary boundaries, the multiple and interacting pressures, and the fact that partial solutions for one problem lead to pressures in another area or other areas. And when we talk about the pressures, we often talk about separate problems, about biodiversity loss, water scarcity, deforestation, climate change, land use change. And we often see these as very separate problems with very different priorities and solutions. And they're strongly coupled with issues like poverty, inequality, and the lack of capacity in particular areas to deal with multiple problems. But of course, we know that the Earth behaves as a system. The biological, physical, chemical processes interact. They also interact with the human systems, and they determine the prevalent global environmental conditions. So if we have systemic nature of the problems, we're going to be looking for systemic solutions. The challenge is that more than 20 years after the Rio conference, we're faced with persistent problems of unsustainability, and these are complex, they're riddled with uncertainties, and they're deeply rooted in the societal structures and culture. So, business as usual, the way we've been trying to tackle these persistent problems of unsustainability is not an option anymore. So what I'm talking about is transformative systemic changes that are needed to deal with these Earth system challenges. And I have two diagrams here. On the right-hand side, the characterization of planetary boundaries, the idea that if we reach particular thresholds, we have non-linear and abrupt changes afterwards. And at the same time, on the left-hand side, in order to have a transformative change, we're also talking about non-linear changes. Now, it's not a good thing to draw things in straight lines, and I'm sure everything is much more complex than is shown in straight lines here. But the important thing to note is that on both sides, we're talking about non-linearities. We're not talking about small step changes into the future. So transformative change in the knowledge system is not compatible with the old model of science finds the answers and tells everybody else what to do. And instead what we need is open cooperation, a dialogue between the scientific community and all of the other stakeholders. And those are the people who have relevant knowledge for contributing to the solutions. This is a diagram that's taken from the Rescue report produced by the European Science Foundation. Rescue was responding to the challenges of our unstable Earth. And it's a characterization of, on the one side, the left side, the knowledge system, as we often see it represented as a closed system, a one in which within the research and academic community knowledge is held, and on the right-hand side, knowledge in an open system in which there are many different clusters of knowledge within socio-ecological systems. They're diverse, there are different kinds, there are different constellations of knowledge. Some of them are linked with each other, some of them aren't. Some of them have a lot of the academic and research community within them, some of them don't. So a transformation of the knowledge systems is from a closed system where knowledge is kind of kept up in the academic and research community and transferred to those who don't have knowledge, to a diverse system where knowledge is spread throughout. The participation in open knowledge systems brings a lot. It enhances the use of local and specialized knowledge, but it also validates that local and specialized knowledge. It's providing the space for dialogue, communication, and learning. It's supporting the common framing of issues, which improves the legitimacy of the processes because everybody's voice is heard. And that common framing is very often place-based and certainly needs-driven. Supports buy-in, and it improves the understanding of the socio-ecological system. I'm going to go through this example just very quickly to highlight those characterizations that I just made of the participation in an open system. This is taken from a project in context, which I'll talk about again briefly afterwards. What I want to say to this is that it's a process that was carried out in a small community, a rural community in the south of Austria. It started with an analysis, a systems analysis of the community. What capital does that community have? Natural capital, but also social human capital, and so on. It went through a process where the community was invited, first of all, to just listen about what was planned, and surprisingly, instead of about 80 people, 120 showed up. The community itself then, facilitated by the researchers, went through a process of thinking themselves about what their priorities are, what their vision is, and developing a vision for the community, and then deciding what to do. And having decided what to do, setting up working groups, setting up their vision as a real star to guide them into the future, and within those working groups, starting to not only think about what measures could be adopted, but plan those measures, implement them, and monitor how they're working to improve the quality of life in the community. The transformation in science that's needed in order to carry out that kind of a process means broad collaboration, knowledge integration, implementation orientation, a systems approach, taking an approach that thinks of the system as a whole, and new criteria and procedures for assessing the process and its impact. I want to take you through those four things very quickly. The first one was the knowledge integration. And here I take an example from an ongoing project funded by the European Union on Responder, which is about sustainable consumption and production. The point here is that the knowledge integration is taking place by using system mapping as a tool for what we call knowledge brokerage. That is, that people from the research community, but also the business community and policymakers work together to create a system map for a particular problem. The one here, which you don't need to look at in detail, is on mobility, but there are others on food, on housing, on information computing technology. The idea is not to get a perfect map. The idea is to share knowledge by creating a map and understanding more about the system as a whole. The second point on the list was implementation orientation. And there I take the example again of the In Context project, again funded by the European Union. If you go to the website, you'll find that they've started towards the end of the project now to produce a series of research briefs, action research for sustainability, reflections on transition management in practice is one example. And there they point out some of the challenges of this implementation orientation. One is that you are no longer, as a researcher, a neutral analyst. You become part of the process. And becoming part of that process needs some very special skills, trust building, and adapting to the local context, becoming part of that. The third example, taking a systemic approach, I would point to the Matisse project on integrated sustainability assessment, a systemic approach that starts with scoping, but looking at the system as a whole, developing a vision for the system as a whole, experimenting, learning, and then going back to look at what you know about the system on the basis of the experiments, and perhaps also rescoping from a systemic point of view. And last but not least, from those 4 points that I raised before on what needs to change, evaluation criteria. This has been a topic that's been covered extensively in the project Vision RD for SD. RD for SD means Research and Development for Sustainable Development. And evaluation practices have been covered there in one ad hoc study and numerous meetings. And the point is that these criteria have to go much more strongly towards the societal impact of what is being carried out, the process design and the process implementation, and much less on things like the number of peer-reviewed presentations. So moving forward on this transformation, we realized that this kind of work, the implementation orientation and the integration, needs time. And it probably needs funding that is in phases, that take into account the fact that you have to keep going through a process of scoping, visioning, experimenting, learning, and then going back to the beginning. It needs considerably newer skills, the facilitation, the mediation, but also the system thinking. The research has become a part of the process, as shown with the In Context project, so that they become a part of the, not only of the systems analysis, but also of the implementation, evaluation, and learning. The outcomes are open, which makes it very hard for the evaluation of this kind of implementation-oriented work. You can't say, when you write a proposal at the beginning, that you know what's going to happen at the end of the project. And the excellence, as I pointed out, points to the success in the process design and implementation, and not in the number of peer-reviewed papers. Whoops, it's going backwards, sorry. So, a transformation of the knowledge system, or 4 of the systems and subsystems talks about a deep and systemic change in both research and academia, moving from what I have on the left-hand side here, a very linear circle of we plan, we do, we check, and we act, to spiral, to one in which we experiment and learn, to one in which the learning process is within the research community, within the academic community, and within the stakeholder community, but also a process of experimentation and learning that needs to get credit within both the research and the academic communities. I think I managed to say well in time, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Jill. You nearly had me there when it went out when I was quite ready for it. We've got actually a little bit of extra time to ask for questions. So have we got any questions online first? Are there any questions from the online audiences or from the co-conference in Germany? I challenge you to come up with a question by the end of the question session. Liven us up over here. Have we got any questions in the room then? Up the back.
Hello, Jill. This is Christian Pohl from ETH Zurich. A nice flower you have on your desk, by the way. Jill, I'm wondering about how the concept of open knowledge systems relates to other concepts we are discussing here in the World Cloud, like transdisciplinary research, interdisciplinary research, action and implementation sciences and system thinking and whatever we have on the map. Is it a kind of umbrella term, or is it a new word that we should put on this word cloud?
I think it's strongly related to things like transdisciplinarity, systems thinking, because we're talking about knowledge systems in which the knowledge of the research community is only one of the knowledges that is on the table for looking towards solutions. But I do think it's an umbrella term that helps us to emphasize the openness and to emphasize the fact that we're talking about very different constellations of where research fits into the whole picture.
Thanks very much. Have we got any others? Yes?
Hi Jill, my name's Liz Bolton. I'm a PhD candidate here at the ANU in Canberra. Some of the initial reading... Oh, you can't hear? Is that better? Oh, can you hear now? I'm not sure if she can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, you can. Yeah, look, just some of the reading I've done initially on integrated solutions is that one of the biggest problems is not the lack of knowledge and models and things, but it is the human issues in the group. The dominant personality, not getting the right people there at the right time, and conflicts and egos and this sort of thing. So I just wondered if you could comment on the human side of these integrated teams. You mentioned that you need new skills in facilitation, mediation and so forth, but I was wondering if you were training your researchers in those skills or you're importing them from people who are really good in that from another field, for example. Thank you.
Well, first of all, yes, I think we have to train people to do this, and we do. But yes, we can also import the skills from elsewhere if we know where they are and can use them. The reason that we also emphasize that these projects take time is exactly because of all of those possible conflicts and all of the facilitation and conflict resolution and mediation that's needed. And one of the best ways we found of getting that conflict sort of cleaned up at the beginning is through this long phase of scoping. What's the problem? finding out whose problem, or the different ways that people are viewing their problems, and a joint vision. And creating that joint vision, it takes time. It sometimes takes much longer than you anticipate in the project. But with that, you begin to develop a sense of community that people will then take forward. It is a skill to do that, but that to me is the way of bringing these different perspectives on the problem together and thinking a way forward where everybody is happy with taking that way.
Thanks very much, Jill. Have we got a question, Robin?
Is this working? Okay. No, I don't want to disappoint anyone. It's not online, but it's empty, the screen. So somebody needs to do something out there, if they can hear me. But I have a question.
A renewed challenge to our online audience. Come up with your questions.
This is real. Oh, hello. Oh, that was good. So let's do, that's an implementation. I just did that. Did you see that? I made a call and said thing happened. Can I ask a question? Thanks very much for your presentation. I really appreciate hearing another person say and acknowledge the time it takes and facilitation skills it requires to do this work, and sometimes we outsource too, and not all of our discovery research team are necessarily bred or trained for that kind of work. But I just had one question I wanted to ask you under the moving forward piece that you did, and you were naming where we needed to head. And I'm curious about the point around that outcomes are open. And you said in implementation-orientated work, outcomes needed to be open. Were you referring to the outcome of a peer-reviewed, like can you just talk a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I mean is that when you start a process that begins with a scoping phase together with the stakeholders, or developing a vision of where you want to be in 30 years from now, and you're writing a proposal to get funding to do this kind of work, you will not be able to tell your funder what's going to happen and what the focus of the process is going to be, because that is determined by the stakeholders and by the dialogue that takes place. So the process of doing this implementation-oriented research is open at the beginning completely. It depends on what the stakeholders say they think the problem is. It depends on what the system analysis that's carried out at the beginning suggests are the major areas that need to change, and it depends on the vision that's developed by the dialogue process that takes place. So, and this puts a lot of, it's extremely difficult for the normal funding mechanisms to deal with, because you're essentially saying, I'm going to start a process with these stakeholders in this particular place or this particular socio-ecological system, but I can't tell you what the outcomes are going to be.
That makes a lot of sense. It's very similar to the work we do, so it's helpful to understand you were thinking from a funder. Can I reinforce this person online that posted a question really quickly? Because thank you. Oh gosh. I'm terrible at pronouncing people's names. I'm so sorry. Martina Ukowitz. The subject is systems change. It's fabulous. The question is, you were talking about deep and systemic change in academia. How do you judge the actual situation, and what would be helpful to foster such a change?
Okay, well, in a couple of minutes it's a really hard one, because a lot of the discussions in the Vision RD for SD projects have shown that a lot of changes are needed. I think the main thing is that we don't teach the skills that are needed for this kind of a process, and we don't teach the systemic nature of the problems enough. Yes, we cover it in some places, and there are some shining examples of good practice, but overall we're still giving credit for traditional kinds of research projects and not for the kind of process orientation and process design that we're going to need. So the changes will have to be in what is taught, except, of course, not changes in places that are currently good examples, and changes in the criteria that we use to evaluate progress and provide the incentives for career paths in this kind of work.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the question from the online audience and also for a good discussion session here. We've come to the end of this session now, so I'd like everybody to join with me in thanking Jill for a very thought-provoking talk and some good long question and answer session. So thank you very much, Jill.